If you're here, it's not by accident. There's a connection in your life that never made sense on paper. Not by logic, not by timing, and definitely not by age, yet your soul recognized it instantly. Aquarius, this isn't about who's younger or older. This is about a frequency that met another frequency and couldn't pretend it didn't feel something real. If this resonates, comment below, I received this message. Because what you're about to hear isn't meant to convince your mind. It's meant to remind your soul why this connection changed you and why the story is far from over. Alright, Aquarius, stay with me for a moment. Just you and me here. I want you to take a breath. The slow kind. The kind you take late at night when the world finally goes quiet. Because what you're feeling, this connection that refuses to be explained, was never meant to live in your mind. You didn't imagine it. You didn't project it. And you didn't create it out of loneliness. From the very first moment, something in you knew. Not your thoughts. Not your expectations. Your soul. It was a recognition. Subtle, but undeniable. Like walking into a room you've never seen before, yet knowing exactly where the light switch is. That's how this began. Not through logic, not through shared circumstances, not through age, timing, or social rules. Your soul recognized theirs before your mind even had a chance to ask questions. And that's why it felt different. Dramatic, not chaotic, just real. You may have tried to explain it away, told yourself it didn't make sense, that it wasn't practical, that it didn't fit the story you thought your life was supposed to follow. But Aquarius, your soul doesn't follow scripts. It follows frequency. This connection never asked for proof. It never asked you to justify it to anyone. It didn't need permission from the world around you. It simply arrived, quiet, certain, unapologetic, and that certainty may have unsettled you, because when something is real at that level, there's nothing to perform, nothing to chase, nothing to convince yourself of. It just exists. You felt it in the way time shifted when they entered your space, in the way conversations lingered, even after they ended, in the way silence between you never felt empty. Ask yourself something gently. Did you feel seen before you ever felt desired? That's not an accident. This wasn't about chemistry alone. It wasn't about attraction trying to impress itself. It was recognition. Two frequencies brushing against each other and remembering something ancient. That's why your mind struggled to keep up. Because the mind wants reasons. The soul just knows. And knowing like this can feel unsettling in a world that asks for explanations. But Aquarius, you were never meant to live only in what can be explained. This connection didn't arrive to disrupt your life. It arrived to reveal you to yourself, to show you the parts of you that respond to truth before approval, to depth before comfort, to resonance before reason, and maybe that's why it stayed with you, even when you tried to move on, even when distance appeared, even when silence settled in, because what begins at the level of the soul doesn't disappear when the mind gets confused. It waits, patient, steady, alive. And as you sit with that feeling now, not trying to label it, not trying to solve it, just allowing it to breathe, you may notice something soft opening inside you. Not urgency, not longing, but clarity. The kind that doesn't rush, the kind that trusts the unfolding. And in that quiet recognition, something else begins to stir. Stay here with me, Aquarius. Let the quiet stretch a little longer. There's something you may have noticed, even if you never said it out loud. Something about them that didn't match the number attached to their age. They move through the world differently, not rushed, not careless. There's a weight to their presence, but not a heaviness. It's the kind of depth you usually recognize in people who have lived many chapters already. Yet here it is, carried by someone younger in years. You felt it the first time you really looked at them. Not just saw them, but noticed them. Their eyes didn't search for approval. Their words weren't trying to impress. There was a quiet knowing beneath the surface, like they were listening to something most people never hear. An old soul doesn't announce itself. It hums. Soft. Steady. And something in you responded to that frequency. They feel deeply, even when they don't show it. They question life in moments where others stay distracted. They crave meaning in a world that keeps offering shortcuts. That kind of hunger doesn't come from age. It comes from memory. Soul memory. You may have caught yourself wondering how someone so young could understand things you struggled to put into words. How they sensed shifts in you before you spoke. How they recognized truth without needing it explained. That wasn't coincidence. That was resonance. They weren't drawn to you because of who you appeared to be. They were drawn to what you carry, the way you hold space, the way you see beyond surfaces, the way you value depth over noise. Age was never the question for them. It simply didn't register. Because when an old soul meets a familiar frequency, time steps aside. What mattered was how safe they felt being real with you. How conversations moved past small talk without effort. How silence didn't feel awkward, but comforting. That's the kind of connection their soul has been searching for. Not excitement for excitement's sake, not distraction, but something that feels anchored, something that feels true. And maybe that surprised you, because society trains us to measure compatibility with numbers, with expectations, with what makes sense from the outside. But Aquarius, you've never lived from the outside in. You've always known that what's real doesn't need to be explained to be valid. They sense that in you. Before they understood it consciously, before they had language for it, their soul recognized yours as something familiar, something steady, something that invited growth instead of performance. That's why the connection felt calm, even when it stirred things up inside you. Why it felt grounding, even when it challenged you. An old soul in a younger body doesn't want to be led. It wants to walk beside someone who sees them clearly. And you do. Not because you're older, but because you listen differently, you feel differently, you honor what's beneath the surface. So if you ever question whether this connection was real, or whether it was appropriate, or whether it made sense at all, let that soften now. Because souls don't count years, they recognize truth. And when that recognition happens, quietly, naturally, something else begins to awaken. Not urgency, not fear, but a gentle pull toward becoming more of who you already are. Stay with me, Aquarius. Let the air settle around us for a moment. There's something important you may not have fully realized yet. Not because you weren't paying attention, but because some truths only reveal themselves after they've already changed us. Your presence did something to them. Not loudly, not dramatically, not in a way that demanded credit. It happened quietly. The way dawn arrives before the sun is even visible. You didn't come into their life to teach. You didn't arrive with answers or instructions. You weren't trying to awaken anything at all. You simply showed up as yourself. And that was enough. There's a frequency you carry, Aquarius. A steadiness. A clarity. A way of being that doesn't rush to define itself. When they encountered that frequency, something inside them paused. You may have noticed it. That moment when their guard softened. When they became more reflective. When their questions shifted from surface level to something quieter. More honest. You didn't push them to look inward. You made it safe to do so. Around you, they began to notice their own patterns. The habits they had outgrown. The distractions they used to avoid feeling. The parts of themselves that were asking for more meaning. Not because you pointed them out, but because your presence held a mirror that didn't judge. And mirrors like that can be life-changing. You may have seen them become quieter at times. More thoughtful. Less interested in things that once excited them. That wasn't confusion. That was awakening. When someone begins to wake up, their old life starts to feel a little too loud, too rushed, too shallow. You didn't pull them away from the world. You reminded them of themselves. That's a powerful thing, Aquarius. And it's not something you can force or fake or manufacture. It happens naturally when one soul is living in alignment and another is ready to remember. They started asking questions they had avoided before, about purpose, about truth, about what actually matters when everything superficial falls away. And somewhere in that process, they associated that clarity with you. Not dependency, not attachment, recognition. They didn't need you to guide them. They needed you to exist honestly. That's why this awakening didn't feel chaotic. It felt grounding, even when it challenged them, even when it stirred emotions they weren't prepared for. Awakening doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives as stillness, as awareness, as the quiet realization that you can no longer live on autopilot. You gave them that realization without ever trying to. And maybe that's why this connection feels sacred to them. Because it didn't take from them. It gave something back. It gave them permission to grow. If you ever wondered why they changed after meeting you, why their priorities shifted, why they seemed to step into a deeper version of themselves, this is why. Not because you transformed them, but because you reminded them of who they already were beneath the noise. And when that kind of remembering begins, it doesn't stop. It ripples outward. Into choices, into courage, into moments where they show up differently in the world. As you sit with that truth now, notice how it feels in your body, not heavy, not overwhelming, just quietly right. And in that quiet recognition, something between you continues to breathe. Stay with me, Aquarius. Let this moment breathe. There may have been times when the space between you felt wider than before. Moments when the energy softened, pulled back, quieted itself without explanation. And maybe your mind tried to fill in the gaps, wondering if something was lost, if feelings had changed, if the path had somehow bent the wrong way. But listen closely now, because what you experienced was not absence. It was alignment. True connection does not disappear when it goes quiet. It doesn't collapse under distance. It doesn't fade when words pause. Sometimes it steps back, not to leave, but to allow something deeper to happen. There are seasons in a soul's journey where movement must turn inward, where growth doesn't announce itself, where becoming happens in stillness. When the energy between you shifted, it wasn't a rejection. It wasn't a loss of feeling, it was a call for each of you to return to yourselves, to listen more closely to what was unfolding inside, to complete something unfinished, to strengthen a part of your identity that could not be built while holding on. You may have felt this as confusion, or longing, or a quiet ache without a name. That doesn't mean something went wrong. It means something meaningful was forming. Aquarius, deep connections do not rush forward without pauses. They respect timing, they honor readiness. There are moments when two souls must step into their own inner work so that the connection can eventually stand on stronger ground. Distance in these moments is not punishment, it is protection. Protection from forcing outcomes before they are ready, from leaning on each other instead of standing fully upright, from mistaking closeness for completeness. You were both being guided inward, toward reflection, toward integration, toward becoming more whole on your own. And that kind of work cannot be done while holding someone else's hand. You may have noticed that even during these quieter stretches, the connection never truly left you. It lived beneath the surface. Steady, present. You still felt them, in passing thoughts, in sudden emotions, in moments where your heart responded without reason. That is not coincidence. That is continuity. True bonds don't require constant contact to exist. They exist because something essential was recognized. And when each soul completes what it needs to complete, when clarity replaces confusion, when strength replaces uncertainty, the energy naturally begins to shift again. Not with urgency, not with pressure, but with readiness. You were never meant to cling during these moments. You were meant to trust. Trust that growth was happening. Trust that silence was doing work words could not. Trust that what is real does not disappear when it rests. This is how conscious connections evolve. They expand by allowing space. They deepen by honoring individual journeys. And if you let yourself soften into that truth now, if you release the need to label every pause, you may feel something steadier replace the doubt. A calm understanding, a grounded knowing, that what is meant to continue will do so naturally. And as that understanding settles, the air begins to change again. Subtle, almost unnoticed, a quiet readiness. Like something gently turning toward the light. Stay with me, Aquarius. Let the quiet hold us for a moment longer. Even when there were no messages, no calls, no visible signs of contact. You knew, not because you were waiting, not because you were attached, but because something inside you stayed aware. Connection like this does not rely on words. It doesn't disappear when conversation pauses. It simply changes the way it speaks. You may have felt it arrive without warning. A sudden heaviness in your chest, or a warmth that made no sense in the middle of an ordinary day. Moments when their energy brushed past you as if to say, I am still here. You didn't imagine that. There are shifts a soul feels before the mind can form a thought. And Aquarius, you are especially sensitive to those shifts. You read the unseen the way others read headlines. You may have sensed when something big was happening for them. A turning point, a realization, a quiet victory they hadn't yet shared with anyone. You felt it not as information, but as emotion. A change in your own internal weather. Maybe your mood lifted for no clear reason. Or you felt reflective, pulled inward. Dreams became more vivid. Their presence appeared in places you didn't invite it. That wasn't longing. That was communication. Soul communication doesn't use language. It uses resonance. When two people are connected at that level, energy moves first. Words follow later. Sometimes much later. And sometimes words never arrive at all. Because they aren't needed. You didn't need updates to know they were growing. You didn't need explanations to sense their progress. Something in you simply recognized the moment they stepped into a new version of themselves. That recognition may have come with tenderness, or pride, or a quiet smile you couldn't explain. And perhaps that surprised you. Because you weren't trying to stay connected. You weren't holding on. You were living your life, doing your work, showing up for yourself. Yet the connection remained. That's how you know it was real. Attachments demand attention. Soul bonds remain present without effort. This kind of connection doesn't distract you from your life. It enriches it quietly. It reminds you of something deeper without pulling you away from where you are. You may have noticed that during these silent stretches, you actually became more grounded, more focused, more aligned with yourself. That's not coincidence. When a connection operates beyond words, it supports growth instead of consuming energy. It allows both people to evolve without losing themselves. And that's something rare, something precious. Aquarius, you are not meant to chase clarity through constant communication. You are meant to trust what you feel when everything else goes quiet. Trust the subtle signals, the inner knowing, the calm certainty that doesn't need reassurance. Because when communication returns to the physical world, it often does so naturally, effortlessly, as if no time has passed at all. And when it does, you may notice something different, not urgency, not confusion, but a deeper ease. a steadier presence, a sense that whatever unfolds next is already meeting you exactly where you are. And in that calm awareness, the connection continues to move, not through words, but through truth. Stay with me, Aquarius. Let the night keep unfolding. There's a moment you may recognize, even if you never spoke about it. That quiet instant when something good happens for them, something earned, something real, and before they tell anyone you feel it. Not as a presence. It arrives softly, like a shift in the air. A calm certainty that settles into your chest without asking permission. This is how your energy moves in their life. When they cross a threshold, when they overcome something that once felt heavy, when they step into a version of themselves that carries more confidence, more clarity, your frequency shows up. Not to rescue, not to hold them up, but to acknowledge what has already happened. It's almost like a silent nod between souls. A recognition that says, you did it, you listened, you chose growth. They may not even understand why you come to mind in those moments, why your presence feels close when there's no conversation happening, why a memory of you brings a sense of calm instead of distraction. But it's because your energy is familiar to their becoming. You don't appear as a need, you appear as confirmation. And that matters more than you realize. There is a difference between being someone's support and being someone's signal. Support can create dependence. A signal reminds a person of their own strength. That's the role you play here. When they rise, your energy doesn't pull them backward. It meets them where they are. Steady, grounded. Almost like a quiet witness saying, this growth is real. You're not imagining it. That's why they can't dismiss this connection. No matter how logical they try to be. No matter how much they tell themselves it should be simpler than this. Because every time they level up, every time life opens a new door for them, your presence appears as part of the moment. Not demanding attention. Not asking to be chosen. Just present. And that presence speaks volumes. It tells them the connection isn't built on fantasy. It isn't fueled by longing or lack. It exists because both of you are evolving in ways that recognize each other. You may have noticed this pattern too, that you don't feel anxious when they succeed. You don't feel left behind. You feel aligned. That's not something you can fake. It means your sense of self is intact. Your identity is whole, and the connection doesn't threaten that. Instead, it affirms it. Aquarius, this is what conscious connection looks like. It doesn't collapse under growth, it expands with it. And in a world that often confuses love with control, this kind of bond feels almost unfamiliar. But it is deeply human, deeply respectful, deeply real. You are not meant to be the reason they rise. You are meant to be the frequency that recognizes the rise when it happens. And that recognition leaves a mark. It tells their soul this path is aligned. This work matters. This connection is not imagined. As that truth settles in them, something steadier begins to take shape, not urgency. Not pressure, but a quiet confidence that whatever unfolds between you will do so from a place of strength. And as that confidence grows, the connection finds a new rhythm, one that feels less like wondering and more like knowing. Stay with me, Aquarius. Let me say this gently. The world is very good at naming things, labeling them, reducing them to something it can recognize quickly. From the outside, people see numbers, timelines, circumstances. They see the outline of a story and assume they understand the whole thing. But they are only looking at the surface of the water. They don't feel what you feel. They don't sense what moves between you and them when no one is watching. They don't hear the quiet recognition that happens before words ever arrive. And that's okay, because this connection was never meant to be validated by the crowd. What you and they feel lives in a different register, one that doesn't announce itself, one that doesn't perform for approval. There is a familiarity here that has nothing to do with history in this lifetime, a feeling of ease that doesn't need explanation. As if something ancient simply nodded and said, there you are. You felt it. That moment when being near them felt natural instead of exciting. When the connection didn't demand attention but offered understanding. That kind of recognition doesn't come from circumstance. It comes from memory. Not memory you can place on a timeline, but memory the soul carries quietly. That's why outside opinions fall flat. They're speaking a language that doesn't apply here. They see difference where you feel resonance. They see contrast where you feel continuity. They try to explain something that was never built from logic. Aquarius, you've always known that truth doesn't need consensus to exist. You've lived long enough to understand that some of the most real things in life are invisible to those who aren't listening. This connection doesn't ask you to defend it. It doesn't need you to convince anyone. It simply asks you to stay honest with yourself. And that honesty may have cost you comfort at times. It may have asked you to sit with questions you couldn't answer out loud. It may have required you to trust your inner compass even when it pointed somewhere unfamiliar. That's not weakness. That's integrity. The people who only see the surface will move on to the next story. the next explanation, the next thing that makes sense quickly. But what you feel does not move quickly. It deepens. It settles. It waits for the right moment to be understood by the only person who truly needs to understand it. You. There is a quiet strength in knowing that not everyone has access to your inner world, that some experiences are sacred because they are shared only between those who can feel them. This is one of those experiences. And as you release the need for external validation, something in you relaxes. Your breath deepens. Your body remembers how to trust itself again. You don't need permission to honor what feels true. You don't need agreement to stay aligned. You don't need witnesses for something that already lives within you. What matters has already taken root. It's steady now, grounded. And as you allow yourself to stand quietly in that truth, without explanation, without defense, you may notice the connection responding in its own way. Not louder, not more dramatic, just clearer, more honest, more real. And that clarity carries you forward with a calm that doesn't need to be proven. Stay with me, Aquarius. Let everything slow down right here. There's a truth about this connection that brings a different kind of peace once you really let it land. This was never about filling a space inside you, never about escaping loneliness, never about holding on because you were afraid to let go. You didn't meet them because you were incomplete. You met them because you were already becoming more yourself. That matters. This connection doesn't ask you to abandon who you are. It doesn't shrink your world. It doesn't demand that you choose between your path and your heart. Instead, it expands you. You remain whole when you stand alone, grounded in your values, clear in your direction, comfortable in your own silence. And that's exactly why this bond feels different. Because when two people meet from a place of wholeness, what forms between them is not dependency. It's resonance. When your energies come into alignment, something subtle but powerful happens. Your thoughts sharpen. Your intuition strengthens. Your courage feels more accessible, not because they complete you, but because they reflect you. Each of you acts like a tuning fork for the other. When one grows, the other feels it. When one steps into truth, the other recognizes it instantly. This is evolution shared, not borrowed. You help each other rise without pulling each other off balance. You challenge each other without control. You inspire each other without obligation. That's rare, Aquarius, and it requires maturity of the soul. This is what awakened companionship looks like. Two individuals walking their own paths, yet aware that their frequencies amplify when they align. You don't lose yourself here. You become clearer. You don't shrink to fit. You expand naturally. And maybe that's why age never entered the equation. Because evolution doesn't care about numbers. It cares about readiness. Readiness to grow. Readiness to tell the truth. Readiness to release old versions of yourself when they no longer fit. Both of you answered that call, not perfectly, not without pauses or questions. But honestly, this connection doesn't promise, it promises growth. It doesn't promise certainty. It offers clarity. And clarity, when you really sit with it, is far more grounding than comfort ever could be. You are not here to cling. You are here to create something conscious, something that honors individuality while deepening connection. And that kind of bond doesn't rush toward labels or outcomes. It unfolds naturally, at its own pace. As you hold that understanding now, notice how your body responds. The steadiness, the quiet confidence. This is not a love that drains you, it fuels you. Not a connection that asks you to prove anything, but one that invites you to live more fully, more truthfully, more awake. And as you continue forward, carrying this awareness with you, life begins to meet you differently. Choices feel clearer, boundaries feel stronger, and what aligns stays. What doesn't fades gently. This is the rhythm of conscious connection. And it's one you already know how to walk, quietly, confidently, in your own time. All right, Aquarius, stay with me just a little longer. If this message found you tonight, it's because something in you was ready to hear it, not to be convinced, but to be remembered. What you felt through this story wasn't coincidence, it was recognition. Recognition of a connection that didn't ask for permission. Recognition of a truth that didn't need to be explained. Recognition of the part of you that already knows you are not here to love halfway, or to live small, or to doubt what your soul responds to. This journey was never about age. Never about labels. Never about fitting into a shape that made others comfortable. It was about awakening. And that awakening, yours. And maybe as you sit with this now, you feel something steady inside you. Not urgency, not longing, but trust. Trust in your intuition. Trust in your timing. Trust that what is real does not rush, does not beg, and does not disappear. Aquarius, you are not walking this path alone. There are others listening right now who felt the same quiet recognition, the same calm certainty, the same gentle fire. If this message resonated, let your voice be part of this space. Leave a comment and write, "I trust myself." And if you feel called to stay to walk this journey with us, subscribe. This is a community for those who listen deeply, love consciously, and choose truth over noise. Because this is not where the story ends, it's where it opens. The next message is already forming. The journey continues. And when it's time, you'll feel it. Until then, stay aligned, stay awake, and above all, stay true to what your soul recognizes.